Good evening, everybody. I am absolutely delighted to have our friend of the channel for about 5 years now, Kevin Annett, back on. Earlier today, we did a revisit of Kevin's content that we're allowed to show on YouTube. We had a 3-hour marathon, and so many people have got questions for you, Kevin, and they were just mind blown by your personal experience, by your level of research into the Pope, into the Vatican, into the horrors of the royal family and the collaborations, the genocide, etc., especially in Canada and Kamloops. So we have got all of Kevin's links in the description box. Please support his important work. And you know he's over the target when he's had assassination attempts, poisoning attempts on his own life. He's kept us abreast of those developments over the years. I've not seen Kevin for a bit. It's since Trump got in power that YouTube has eased off on what we can say a little bit. Let's not go overboard. And hopefully this live stream will not be wiped off the face of the earth like many of other Kevins were when there was extremely heavy censorship on us previously. Now, Kevin, perhaps a lot of the viewers are not familiar with your work and don't know who you are this evening because we've got a lot more viewers now. Before we get into the death of the Pope and the consequences of that, could you just explain your history? You know, you were a man of the cloth yourself, and you became an activist, etc.
Well, 30 years ago now, I arrived as a Protestant minister on the west coast of Canada with a young family, and I found quickly that a lot of children were going missing, Native children, and that many Native children had died in the local, what they call residential schools. They were death camps where half the children never came back. And over the years, not only after getting fired and blacklisted and defrocked proudly from the United Church of Canada, I started a campaign that eventually forced out the truth, forced the pseudo-apology in 2008, but it also sparked an international movement around setting up common law courts, helped force Ratzinger out of office in 2013. And so it's mushroomed all over the planet because we're facing the same crime, the same kind of concealment of these killers in high places. A lot of that's at murderbydecree.com. You can read the history. And what's relevant for today, one of my 28 books, this one you can get on Amazon. It's all the reasons why the Vatican is a criminal power. And it gives you a lot of juicy information for people who need more background on that.
And link is in the description box for that. And you can watch Kevin's other broadcasts as well. So, Kevin, I mean, you've been researching this stuff for so long. As soon as I saw the news about the death of Pope Francis, it's like your face just popped up right into my head. I mean, how did you feel when you saw this news?
Well, frankly, I was disappointed that the guy wasn't arrested and put in jail, which he's already being criminally convicted for his participation in these various child trafficking and killing activities, including when he was a bishop in Argentina, where there's an interesting connection between him and the Queen of the Netherlands, Maxima Zorreguieta, where they've been paying money to each other for the last, I think it's over 10 years now. And because they know each other's sordid history in Argentina. Her father and he were both part of the military junta that were killing a lot of people. Bergoglio turned a blind eye, but he was also directly involved in these Ninth Circle cult activities. As a matter of fact, we just posted on my Telegram site evidence that forced Ratzinger out, in which this woman, Tos Nienhaus, who was raised in this Ninth Circle cult, saw Ratzinger and a guy called Bishop Elfrink from Utrecht, Holland, torturing to death children in a castle in Belgium. And she described in grisly detail that, but also in other recordings we have too, she described seeing Archbishop Bergoglio, i.e. Pope Francis, at these same events. Apparently this Ninth Circle cult, participation in it is mandatory for anyone wishing to become Pope. So, that's kind of apropos to what we're experiencing today with his death.
Could you explain, Kevin, because you're familiar with all this terminology, what the Ninth Circle is?
According to Vatican documents and eyewitnesses who were raised in the cult, it refers to the ninth circle of hell. In Dante's Inferno, Dante Alighieri, the Italian poet, who actually was an insider with the Vatican, described there being 9 levels of hell. And at the 9th level, where Satan resides, is where people go when they betrayed a sacred trust. So like the trust of a child, for example. And it's referring to this cult where children are brought in, ritually tortured, raped, and killed, and then they're cannibalized because in the body parts eaten. Because it's believed, like in the Catholic Mass, that by consuming the blood and the body of the innocent, whether Christ or a child, you're given eternal life. It's really the same mindset, and it's also used to entrap politicians and judges. We've interviewed people who have, gone through that. Unfortunately, if you go into this in any detail, you tend to disappear or get attacked. A lot of our witnesses have gone missing, especially in Europe, where it's so prominent, right?
So, Kevin, are you suspicious about the timing of the announcement of the death of the Pope?
Well, it's interesting. Yeah, I am, because if you go back to just 2 years ago, if you remember, Bergoglio, Pope Francis, came to Canada under the guise of, issuing apologies to all of their tens of thousands of murdered children. But in fact, as we proved, he went up to, on the west coast of Canada, super pope called Prince Rupert, which is pretty much Chinese owned now. The Chinese have pretty much bought up all the oil and gas in northern Canada. But they've done that with Vatican funding. And what's interesting is when Bergoglio went to this meeting, the purpose of it was to sign an agreement with China to underwrite their buying up of resources all over North America and buying up the infrastructure and everything, underwriting them for almost $1 trillion every year. The guy who brokered that was the present Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin, who's one of the prime candidates to be the next, Bishop of Rome. Parolin is very pro-China. Bergoglio wasn't. And they forced his compliance by blackmailing him about his ninth circle activities and his relationship with the Queen of the Netherlands, Maxima Zorregieta. So all along, he was trying to straddle the fence between the pro-China faction. A lot of the Vatican money is now going into the BRICS alliance, or China, and the West, right? So the fact that it's happening now, I don't think is accidental, because it's, reached a point now with what's going on with the tariff war and the trade war. There's different ideas about what that's all about, but it definitely involves Vatican money, Vatican Bank money, and their move into the China faction. So, I think he might have just been too much of an impediment anymore to that deal going through. We know that, living here on the west coast of Canada, you see it all the time. The Chinese are not only buying up everything, but their troops are operating openly, especially in the northern areas where the liquid natural gas sites are, which they have all grabbed. So, it's all about money and politics, as always, right?
Question from Amy, and thank you for the questions coming in, viewers. Please keep them coming in. We will eventually get to them. Do you think that the next Pope will be more of a conservative with their views on Catholicism? Well,
money talks, and the next Bishop of Rome has to be pro-China, or won't be allowed in. That's why I think Parolin is a likely candidate, although I posted something on my website, which I sent to you. One of the candidates is this, trying to remember the bastard's name. He's a Dutch cardinal, and he's in line. He represents the conservative faction, Willem Eyck. He's a Cardinal, College of Cardinals insider, and he is directly tied to the Ninth Circle. We have eyewitnesses who saw him taking part in these activities. So the problem with, they're more conservative cardinals who tend to be with the Ninth Circle. So for a number of reasons, it wouldn't be smart for them to go with conservative. They're too compromised by their Ninth Circle links, and they're not tied into the Chinese agenda, which really, like I say, the majority of Vatican Bank funding is now, working with the Chinese rather than the traditional Western alliance.
Yeah, in the news here, they were listing up to 5 possible successors. Do you have various possible successors that you've considered?
Well, I mean, to tell you the truth, I don't really pay much attention to who's the figurehead, because the source of power in the Vatican is the College of Cardinals and their banking interests. About 80% of all the bank deposits in the world are channeled through the Vatican Bank. And they're the guys who dictate, I mean, the Pope has no power. Look at Francis. He didn't even live in the Vatican. He would make statements and then the College of Cardinals would contradict him. So, I mean, it's not like he's, the figurehead is that important. He's just there to keep, the sheep in line and, create the illusion that there's such a thing as Vatican reform,
Yeah, because he was saying that no longer were they going to invest in the military companies, and he was against armaments and things like that. Is that all PR, but behind the scenes they're raking the money in?
Oh, absolutely. The Vatican is one of the largest investors in not only big pharma, but the global arms industry. It's the largest small arms company in the world, Beretta Limited, Italian arms. They fund all the wars all over the planet. So I mean, it's just the problem with religion is that it programs people to believe that some guy on earth is more holy than somebody else, and they know what's best for you, and you have absolute, faith. Is the old saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. That was actually a statement by a British politician, Lord Acton, and he was referring to the Vatican, which is something people is left out of the history books. When the Pope declared himself infallible in 1870, his reaction to that was, well, that's just man playing God, and it's the greatest threat to humanity in the world is somebody being above the law, which the Vatican effectively is. Right?
So Casey wants to know, when did the Roman Catholic Church become Judeo-Christian?
Well, the thing about the Catholic Church is that it's the descendant of the Roman Empire, not of the Christian Church. Even the terms used for the Pope, Vicari Christi, the one who replaces Christ, the Pontifex Maximus, the great bridge between heaven and earth, that was the title of the Roman Emperor. So all of these, Christ is supposed to be the head of the church, not a man, whether it's the king in England or the Pope in Rome. And so it's not so much Christian religion as a neo-pagan emperor worship cult, founded directly on Rome. So, and that's why they have Christ hanging on a cross. They murdered Jesus, replaced him with the Pope. I mean, when you read the history and use common sense and look at the way they act in the world, all of that is true. But you got to get past that mind fog that even atheists have when it comes to do with the Church of Rome, right?
Christine wants to know how much the Vatican is worth and whether they use that money to actually help the poor.
Well, actually, I talk about that in here. And I did a video. I was invited to the Oxford Union to debate a Catholic cleric, and that was canceled, of course, it never happened. But in that, I go into that in great detail. It's the amount of money the Vatican has access to is in the trillions. It's a huge amount. Like I say, they've got most of the deposits of the world, but they also have financial concordats, which are agreements, treaties with most of the countries in the world where your tax money is being channeled right into the Vatican Bank without you even knowing it. And then there's the billions brought in every year from the collection plates and all their corporate investments. They're not allowed to have tax-exempt status if they don't give 100% of the revenue to charitable or religious purposes. Yet here they're buying Exocet missiles for military dictatorships. I mean, they're allowed to get away with murder because they're partners in crime with the state and the big money that have always been, kind of the evil trinity behind genocide and war and all that stuff. So, I mean, it's if you go, actually, if you folks write to me, angelfire101@protonmail.com, I can send you all the links proving all this. And like I say, pick up this book. It's handy. It's only $10 on Amazon, $10 US. Gives a lot of good dirt.
All right, so Rose wants to know, do you think the church and other groups bought the presidency for Trump? And if so, why?
Well, I mean, all, financially and politically, all roads lead to Rome, right? I mean, when I was there first time, back in 2009, one of the senior senators came to me and he said, well, you have to understand the mafia and the banks, Vatican Bank and the politicians and the Pope, they're all the same people. And their main concern is buying all the politicians, keeping them in line. Every political party in Europe is funded with Vatican Bank money, and in America. So what would be the interest of setting up an oligarch who's trying to assume power, whether it's in America or Russia or wherever? It is completely in line with the Vatican corporatist thinking, which is there's one emperor figure and everybody goes along with it. And you don't have dissent, you don't have, people governing themselves. That's a subversive American idea, that people don't need leaders, they can govern themselves in their own communities. So, it's all coming from that mindset that's thousands of years old, of emperor worship. And it just plays out in different forms, right?
So we've got a question here from Anna. Did Francis ever go rogue? There were pictures of him circulated with bruising around the eye, which could have been fake, I guess. What do you think? No, they if there's a pope that's out of line, they just kill him. I mean, remember what happened to Pope John Paul I in 1978? He, a silly little boy, he did things like try to abolish the papal procession, where you carry the guy in on their back. He started an investigation into the Vatican Bank, and 28 days later he was dead. So yeah, I mean, it goes back to ancient Rome. You just get rid of the person, right? Unless you want to use him in some way, make an example of him. Like what the United Church did with me. They just destroyed my life publicly. The only public defrocking of a ministry in United Church history, to say, look what we can do to you, this guy. And so, there's different strategies involved, but normally they don't like to create martyrs. They want to just get people afraid of certain people, certain issues, certain ideas, right? And so, no, I don't think he ever went rogue, because there's a lot of fanciful ideas, but you got to use common sense too. I mean, you don't get into that position of authority unless you're a part of the whole mess. Like I said about the Ninth Circle, every cardinal, every pope since at least the 17th century, the Jesuits, I believe, set up this Ninth Circle. The evidence points to that. So it's been around for centuries, and everybody's in the club. Well, and there's a question here that ties into that, and it says that every president visits the Vatican. What's the significance of that?
Like I said, all roads lead to Rome. And it was interesting because John Adams, one of the founding fathers, the second U.S. president, said that popery and liberty are opposed. If the Roman Catholic Church has a presence in America, the republic is over, because the two can't coexist. They're based on two totally different ideas of law and government, and so that's, in that sense, the American Republic isn't around anymore, because they always pay lip service to Rome, the Pope. And it isn't just because of all the Catholic voters, because 90% of American Catholics don't support Vatican policy on things like birth control and other things. So it's because of the money and, and the political power that brings, right?
Yes, indeed. All about the money. Trevor wants to know, Pope Francis was considered to be contemporary progressive. Do you think we will see more forward thinking and calls for tolerance by the Vatican in the next appointed Pope? No, because the idea, that's just window dressing, and people can't look at the window dressing, but the thing behind it. The so-called progressive Pope Francis came to America in 2017 and beatified, that is, turned into a saint, a guy called Junipero Serra, who was a missionary who had worked to death over 100,000 native people in California. And Bergoglio says, we are impressed and inspired by his zeal. Okay, so let's turn a saint, a genocidal maniac, let's turn him into a saint and praise him. That's progressive for a Catholic. I mean, the point is, the mentality is the same. If you're not one of us, we have the right to kill you. I mean, the Vatican, going back 2,000 years, it was a basis of European genocide, that whole idea. So let's, not try to paint him or any of these people in a way that they're not, right? Question from Nikki. How does the Catholic Church make a person become a saint? Well, the idea that anyone can make somebody else a saint is kind of a fallacy. I don't even know what a saint is, right? But I think, if you believe Scripture and says the kingdom of heaven is within all of us, then how come someone is more saintly than somebody else? If you look at who is made a saint, it's always somebody who served the Vatican in some way. Usually a hatchet man like Thomas More in England,
Or, the point is, who are they serving? And the way it's made is the College of Cardinals appoints somebody and just says, this man, we have decided, ranks beatification. And that means, like, I'm not up on Catholic theology because it repulses me and, the whole belief system. But I understand that it puts them in, people literally believe that this person can then intervene for you on the other side. Like, if you pay enough money, you can pray your relative out of hell. It's like, but apparently somebody said when they were in the Vatican Museum, they said, apparently God doesn't like cash, he only takes credit cards. So you kind of imagine heaven being this big bank, right? I mean, people are dumb enough to believe this shit because they've never grown up in their thinking. They're always looking for the father figure to lead them. So, I mean, you get what you pay for.
So M says, the first Jesuit Pope, will he be the last Jesuit Pope? Will there only be Jesuit popes from now on?
Hard to say, but don't forget the whole idea of a black pope, white pope, whatever. Again, it's just fog. I mean, it doesn't really mean much in practice, right? All these different terms, and even the term pope, papa, father, neuro-linguistic programming, he's a father of everyone. Really? I thought God was. So, I mean, no, I don't think that means anything. It's a short answer, right?
So if the prediction of the next pope will be black, are you saying that's meaningless as well?
Yeah, I mean, under their own rules, the Jesuits are not allowed to become popes. They're only allowed to go up to the level of cardinal. So that was my point about Bergoglio. Was he even the Pope? Not according to the Jesuit rules. He wasn't allowed to be. Yet everyone's calling him that. So you can't, you're led around by the nose if you let them define the terms and the reality of what's going on here.
You're asking if there has been or ever will be a female Pope?
They might do it as a public relations gesture, There apparently was one back in, I think it was the 9th century, Pope Joan, an English cardinal, kind of snuck her way in, disguised as, Pope Joan. They expunged her from Vatican records, of course, but what apparently happened was that she was dressed like a man, but then she got pregnant and gave birth in the middle of a papal procession. And when they saw it, at first they thought it was no, this is not bullshit. At first they thought it was a miracle, and then they realized he was a she, and they killed her and the baby on the spot. They're still in Rome.
No.
There's a little marker in Rome. There's a good National Film Board film made on it called Behind the Veil, and it looked about the history of women in the Catholic Church, and they described this. There's a little monument in downtown Rome where they murdered Pope Joan and her baby, tore her to pieces. They were just outraged because she got into the boys' club, right?
Wow, I know. Well, we learn something new every day. Dalla, do you believe we're entering a golden age? And what role, if any, will the Catholic Church play in it? What about the Protestants? Will there be a great revival?
Well, I don't like to use these terms because they don't really mean anything anymore. It's like talking about left and right and all that. But what I think that humanity is reaching a crisis point where people are realizing that a fundamentally different course has to be taken, and that's that. And spiritual revival has nothing to do with religion, of course, and it's outside the labels. And I see that happening all over. I travel a lot, and I do a lot of work with people on the ground, and it's kind of like this 100th monkey thing happening. People are all coming to the same idea at the same time. That is, we have to govern ourselves. You can't trust any institution or any authority figure, no matter how much they beguile you. Make your own common law assemblies and courts, bring in your own laws, enact them. We've been doing that in different countries. And in Canada with Republic of Canada, we've nullified COVID orders and kept tax money in the community. But it also means spiritual reclamation. And I've just published another book on that called Governing Ourselves, a manual on political, personal, and spiritual sovereignty. And I go into a lot of that in that book. So that's another one to get on Amazon.
Seeger wants to know, what are the main differences between Catholicism and Christianity?
Well, like I say, in my belief, a Christian is someone who thinks that Christ is the head of the gathered community of believers called a church, right? But the Catholic Church doctrine says no, the Pope is Christ on earth, literally. So it's, that to me is a blasphemous idea that you can elevate one man above God. And in England, the Anglicans, Episcopalians believe that the king, the monarch, is the head of the church. That's why a lot of my ancestors got burned at the stake and had to come to North America to get away from man-made religions posing as Christianity, right? So I think it, like I say, there is a new kind of reformation happening where people are going back to the source and going back to their scripture, their own faith, realizing we don't need churches to practice our faith, right? Especially when they're genocidal and have blood on their hands and are criminally convicted.
Kathy says, why is it okay to bash Catholics? I'm a Catholic, Kathy, and I was an altar boy, actually. So we're not bashing all Catholics. We are exposing the corruption at the top of the pyramid. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, it's, it's not about attaching yourself to a church and then having to defend it. It's about, isn't a child's life more important than church doctrine or church finances? Because there's a policy in the Catholic Church that every Catholic is expected to abide by, or you get excommunicated, thrown into hell, which I don't believe, but Catholics believe that. Why? If you report a child rapist, nobody has to report child rape, not even to tell the police. And that means, as a Catholic, you're involved in a global criminal conspiracy to protect child rapists. That's just the law. So the Catholic Church sets up their own legal system in every country alongside the existing legal system, and they expect people to defy the laws, the child protection laws of their own country, and help child rapists. I mean, if people can live with that, live alongside that, and think that has something to do with Jesus Christ and the rights of children, then you have no excuse when it happens to your child. So we say to people, Catholic churches are not safe places for children. Get them out, form your own community. I know Catholic priests who have split off and formed their own congregations because they don't want to give money to Rome. There was a movement in Ireland, not in our name, of dissident Catholic priests who are doing that. So do it yourself. Don't rely on a blood-soaked, money-soaked system calling itself a church.
Have you watched the documentary Deliver Us from Evil?
Yeah.
Yeah, that really opened my eyes. All right, so Tez wants to know, what is the point of politics and religion when so many children go missing every year? It's not a priority for them, is it?
Well, no. The abuse of children is a foundation of religion and politics. It's how you keep people in line. You traumatize them at a young age, and then they're afraid to think against, let alone act against, any authority. I see this on Native reservations all over North America. You threaten the children, and everybody does what the chief and council and the government and big money says. So I mean, that's why, like in Canada, the mandatory sentencing for child rape is only 6 months. Yet it's two years in prison for owning a marijuana plant, 2 years, 6 months for raping a child. So children do not matter in practice in this legal system. So that's why it's so hard. This campaign for 30 years now, it's like trying to move a mountain. People don't care about, this. I know individuals care about what happens to children, but don't expect the political or legal system to back you up, or the religious system, because they all profit from it. The Catholic Church is one of the biggest child trafficking agencies in the world. I mean, the facts speak for themselves. You just look into a bit and you'll find all this is true.
Few people have asked where they can watch Deliver Us from Evil. I'm not sure. Just go on Google, put where can I watch Deliver Us from Evil. If you do that, there's a few things called Deliver Us from Evil, but you're looking for the 2006 American documentary film that explores the life of Irish Catholic priest Oliver O'Grady. And he did his sentence, got out, did more, back in, out. Oh, it's disgusting. And they bring in these high-priced lawyers, and all they do is they move him 20 miles away. They promise the parents this isn't going to happen again. They move him 20 miles away. And it just never ends. It's disgusting.
Well, like I say, it's a policy, Crimen Solicitatis, was passed in 1929 by the Vatican. And it says you have to protect child rapists and not tell the police. Look it up. It's in murderbydecree.com in one of the appendices at the back. We've reprinted it.
Is that because they want to protect their own brand and they feel if these guys get convicted, it's going to look bad on them?
Oh yeah, I mean, definitely, it's about protecting the money too. They don't want the lawsuits, right? And you know, it's all about protecting the money and the public image. And that's why when we in Canada, when we started occupying churches on Sunday morning and threatened the money in the collection plate, then they started talking about apologies and investigations. Not before that.
So Casey says, was Pope Benedict forced to step away?
Pope Benedict, you mean?
Oh, Benedict, perhaps, yeah.
Yeah, we had brought a case in an International Common Law Court of Justice, served him and others with the evidence we found about, you know, the Vatican leading genocide in Canada and ongoing child trafficking. 5 days before he resigned, the Spanish government sent a diplomatic note to the Secretary of State in the Vatican saying if Benedict came to Spain, he could face arrest. Based on that evidence I mentioned earlier, which is on my Telegram site, showing that he directly participated in Ninth Circle ceremonies and killed children. And as soon as that came out, the Spanish government threatened to release that. 5 days later, he resigns. First time in 600 years a Pope had done it. No coincidence at all, right?
Which ties into a question which was asked earlier, actually, about the Ninth Circle as to whether any of the criminal acts had been investigated or prosecuted.
They've been attempts to do that, and they always get shut down, always. There were several attempts to stop, and we had success actually in Montreal and just outside Brussels on 2 occasions. We were able to actually stop Ninth Circle ceremonies. Because you get the information and you get it out there, and there's honest cops that want to do the right thing, but it can cost them their life, like it did the Ottawa policeman Kel Gadban, who investigated it. Then he was found dead in the police station the next week of suicide when he was a decorated policeman and a happy family man, right? So I mean, they don't mess around, these guys, right? And so that's more of the same crime, right?
If they've got trillions, if they're worth trillions, they can do anything, can't they, to anyone? So, Dusty, how do you fix the fact they traffic and shame? Can they make themselves relevant again?
No, because that's all based on a rotten idea, which is that we know what's better than you. You know, to me, if you don't believe in emperor worship, then there's no way you can be a Catholic, because it's just a variation on that idea. So you see, you can take the words, you know, talk is cheap, especially from a pulpit, right? You can spout all the words you want, but what do you do every day to uphold human dignity and defend human life? One of the reasons the Catholic Church is against abortion is because it cuts into their profit margin. They actively traffic newborn babies. There's a thing called the Baby for Adoption Protocol in Catholic hospitals all over North America and probably all over the world, but we've documented it here. And they have a list of, from adoption agencies and foster homes, a list of the number of babies they need. So they have, and we've talked to young women this has happened to, young Catholic girls who get pregnant. The priest and their parents convince them to give up the child in utero, signing away the baby. The baby's then trafficked. You know, they make lots of money. I've spoken to people in Spain. This happened under the Franco dictatorship. They would traffic the children of political prisoners. Bergoglio, Pope Francis, who just died, he did that in Argentina. That's why he went from being a priest to the head of the Jesuits in just 19 years. Actually, it was shorter, I think 16. But anyway, because he was doing that. The military junta would control their opposition by grabbing their children. And the Catholic Church made billions out of this, and they still do. So, you know, where does the dignity of the child and what does Jesus Christ come into any of that? Right? Remember what Christ said, his prescription for anyone to harm a child: tie a millstone around their neck and throw them in the nearest ocean. Well, should we enact that, folks?
I'd like to add a bit to that as well. So my mother's mother was jilted at the altar when she was pregnant, and the Catholic Church told my mother's mother that you will burn in hell, you cannot have a baby out of wedlock, and forced her to give my mother up. And the little baby was left, you know, in this medical facility. And then, anyway, she ended up with a good family. It could have been much worse, but it caused my mother separation anxiety and trauma her entire life. And she wrote a book about it called The Blue Plastic Cow. and it still affects us to this day. She's in her 70s. It's kind of like been a defining thing that she didn't know. She spent decades trying to find her real mother and father, and it's just really, really been the defining thing in her life. She only found out when she went to the doctor when she was a teenager, a routine appointment, and at the end of the appointment, the doctor said, "Oh, by the way, do you know you were adopted?" The whole world turned upside down from that moment.
Well, that's right, Sean. That's how close to home it is. And it's a culture of secrecy. Religion is the best vehicle for crime because, A, nobody would suspect they're talking about the love of Jesus. They wouldn't be trafficking children, would they? Well, the bigger the child rapist in town, the more sterling reputation he has to cover up what they're really doing. And that applies especially to religions, So there has to be one law for everybody. That's why, any of these churches that do these crimes, they shouldn't have tax exempt status. They shouldn't have diplomatic status like the Catholic Church has at the UN. I go into that in great detail in this, but there has to be one law for everybody, or we live under tyranny. If you're a child rapist, you know that you can become an ordained Catholic priest and you'll never be harmed. You can rape away, traffic children, law will never touch you. That's pretty much the case.
And we're seeing it over and over again. And last week we had a lady on who was brutalized by the Catholic nuns in Ireland. That was a hell of a story as well.
Yeah.
All right, so Sky wants to know, well, let me preface this. It's a very long answer to this, Sky, that Kevin's got. And we did have 3 hours of Kevin's interviews on the channel this afternoon. You can get it in much more detail. Perhaps you can give a condensed version to this question. Can Kevin talk anything about the orphanage in Canada? I think it was in 1961 when the Queen visited there. I remember him talking about it before, I think, a long time ago.
You mean about the Queen abducting those children?
The disappearance of them, let's say, yeah.
That was October 1964. And my friend, who's now dead, William Coombs, witnessed it. She took 10 children. They were never seen again. That's one of the reasons she was subpoenaed to come to the same common law court case that forced Ratzinger out of office, because it's common for these things to happen, and in fact, we went into it further and discovered that 8 of the 10 children had died. 2 of them were taken back to England and used in ninth circle ceremonies in Carnarvon Castle in Wales. That's according to one of King Charles's own security advisors, Major Johnny Thompson. And who then put a contract out on William Coombs. That's why he was killed. Arsenic poison in St. Paul's Hospital. So there's lots of this evidence out there. The problem isn't lack of evidence. It's where do you take it? How do you put the system on trial? Right? How do you defend children when it's a policy to traffic and torture and murder them?
Yeah, go back to all the ancient religions. They would do that, wouldn't they, to the kids to like get the harvest, the crops growing and things like that.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because, we know about Moloch, the fire god in ancient Canaan. You would throw your firstborn into it. And I'm sure people back then who were challenging that were accused of bashing Molochites because they dared to, confront the child sacrificial ceremony that was necessary for the economy, right? But the ninth circle ceremonies often happen on what's called the Feast of Feralia and Terminalia, which were ancient Roman festivals where they would sacrifice animals and children to ensure the crop. This is between February 22nd and 24th. That's often satanic points of those days in the month, especially early in the year. You'll often find satanic rituals going on. So these are ancient practices, right?
Yeah, and we interviewed a guy, I think it was last year, who managed to get inside Moloch at Bohemian Grove.
Yeah.
He got a lot of threats after that.
Well, the thing is, Sean, you can't operate in the world of big money or politics or religion without encountering this. And, that's why the idea that one of these people who are up in the elite are going to save all of us, right, is a fallacy. I mean, people play that off to gain support and money all the time for themselves, but they're in the club and you're not in it. And it's time we all unite across all these divisions and stop these killers, child killers.
So Laureen wants to know, what do you think was the purpose of Vice President J.D. Vance's visit to the Vatican?
well, just to guarantee loyalty. I mean, who knows? Like, that's the point. You don't really know what's being done. You know, you're allowed to see certain things. It doesn't mean it's really what's going on. Same reason Biden went to Rome, and you know, because don't forget, it comes down to money. The Vatican Bank money is going to China. Could be about that. Could be about, you know, like what I mentioned earlier, China's or the Vatican Bank's underwriting the economic takeover of North America by China, not just resources, but the what's called the Road and Belt Initiative. They're tell you, driving down the highway in Canada, there's a sign. It'll say $85 billion road construction. Hello? $85 billion for road construction? This is massive restructuring of the transportation. And you get it all over the world. China's buying up the trains, the seaports. About 90% of the containers in Seattle and Vancouver port are all owned by China. So, you know, I'm sure that him going to Rome has something to do with that, you know, working out deals, you know.
All right, we've got over 1,000 watching live right now. Please support Kevin and his links in the description box. Please keep the questions coming in while we've got him in the library. And Sega wants to know, Kevin, have you had any supernatural, unexplainable experiences?
Yeah, yes, I have. And I don't talk about them because I don't think people would believe them. But I can tell you one thing that happened, which was kind of interesting. And this was in the height of doing, when I was expanding over to Europe and we began to set up the tribunal. I was set up to be killed in Vancouver one night because I do a lot of street work there, street ministry when I was younger, and people all know me. So this native woman said, Kev, I need your help. I'm being evicted. And I went into her place and it was a setup because there were two guys there with a knife waiting and I would have been dead. Next, and I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I'm very cogent, okay? The next thing I knew, I was out on the street. Don't ask me how. I didn't black out, nothing happened. I was just out on the street. I wasn't there anymore. And I got the hell out of there, of course. But the point is, I don't have an explanation for that. I don't try to put any kind of label on it. I just know that when you're doing the right thing, you're protected. And you don't give up, and you're not afraid of these people, because that's the main way they control people, through greed and fear. You know, so that's one example, but there've been other things. I mean, I took part in exorcisms, including one outside the Vatican just before the tornado hit. I think you know that story.
Could you please repeat it?
October 11th, 2009, I was invited to go to the Vatican, St. Peter's Square. And it's funny because when you're standing in St. Peter's Square, you're not allowed to do any kind of protest or ceremony, or the Vatican cops arrest you immediately. And that had happened to some native elders before. So there I am, standing in the middle of St. Peter's Square. I was asked to do a sermon for the missing children. And then when I was there, I thought, wait a minute, we're in the heart of the beast here. We need to do some kind of exorcism right here. Get this thing out of here. So I did. I began the first stage of an exorcism, which is calling on the entity, the possessing entity, to reveal itself. And these cops were walking by me like I wasn't there. They were looking right at me, and I wasn't stopped or harassed once. Next morning, about 8 o'clock, a tornado hits the center of Rome, first time in 48 years. And that same week, the European press started reporting Ratzinger's role in ordering bishops to cover up child rape. So that's no accident. I mean, it wasn't me. It was something working through me at that moment, calling out the entity to name itself. And ever since then, this stuff has never stopped. You know, the exposure of this stuff is just constant. So you got to be in the right place at the right time and just trust that power, right?
And so the viewers could fully understand the risks you've been taking and continue to take. Could you explain the other attempts on your life, Kevin?
Well, you mentioned I was poisoned in 2021 in the summer. And that was just before I mentioned it had to do with the Nine Circles ceremony we were stopping in Montreal. And I almost died from it. I actually went off into a native community, and some traditional elders were kind of working on me, withdrawing stuff from me. But it was like a psychic attack as well. So anyway, there was that. There've been other attempts, you know, too many to mention, really. And this isn't just taking my kids and blacklisting me. I'll give you an example. Just about about 6 months ago, I was invited by some Vancouver teachers to speak to them about their curriculum and how it doesn't mention any of the stuff in murderbydecree.com. They were trying to get around the censorship of the real genocide that happened. I was in that conference about 20 minutes when the principal showed up and told me to leave. He said, the Vancouver School Board has expressed concern about you being here. And I said, really? Why would that be? You know, but it's that censorship is constantly in place, you know, and why would it be, right? If they bought off all the survivors and dealt with the issue, it's because it's this ongoing crime they know I'm not going to let up on, right, in exposing this. So, you know, I mean, I've been lucky so far, and but the reason I like being on these shows is people need to know this knowledge. If anything did happen to you, they need to carry this on. So that's my focus now. You know, you find your purpose and you're invincible in a way, right?
Kevin, we've got 30 people a day here in the UK being arrested for social media posts. What's it got like in Canada? I mean, Trump's, you know, talking about freedom of speech, and it seems that some of the platforms have eased up a bit, but our government has just doubled down the other way.
Oh, it gets worse everywhere all the time. And, you know, I mean, I'll tell you, one of the reasons it's getting worse is with China so openly operating now everywhere here in North America. You can't really mention that without getting instantly slammed. One of the things we found out is the so-called deportations are not deportations. A lot of them are people being trafficked into private prisons in America, slave labor. Pam Bondi, who's Trump's attorney general, is a former lobbyist for the private prisons. And you got them in England too. I've had my friend Owen was stuck in one. And for 6 weeks without a charge. They make money off them. You know, it's a cash cow, just like Native people are on reservations. So behind the rhetoric of, you know, deportation and all that, that's not what's going on at all. It's the old money game. I mean, Trump International launders money for the Mexican drug cartels, who are the main force in, you know, in trafficking people all over North America. So, yeah, the fact that a politician would profit from legislation personally, I mean, that's the game. It doesn't matter if the Republicans, the Democrats are doing it, everybody does it. And that's why we shouldn't rely on these father figure politicians. We need to just rely on our own common sense and ability to take action ourselves, because it's not going to come from above, right?
Yeah, we've had a few guys on breaking down the government contracts to, you know, housing, the unfettered immigration here. It's in the billions, hundreds of millions. If they go to prison, the private prison contracts, Serco is a big one that's in on it here. And we've got a guy coming on tomorrow at 9 p.m. He's the leader of a party called Britain First, viewers. So he will probably be talking about some of that as well. All right, good. So we've got tons more questions here backed up. Let me see. Here's one from Nikki. In the 1960s, 1970s, the indigenous women in Greenland were being sterilized. Was that a decision of the church?
Oh, well, historically, the Catholic Church has been right in the forefront of sterilization of indigenous people. You know, it's like the relationship between Big Pharma and the churches. For many years, they fund the theological centers and the churches, and in turn, the churches provide children for drug testing experiments. That not just natives or indigenous people in Greenland, but all over the world they do that. But the Catholic Church had a particular role in the sterilization, the development of sterilizing drugs, because they owned the companies that had a major interest in companies like Roche, Pfizer, some of the early Nazi pharmaceutical companies that had a direct tie to the Vatican Bank. So yeah, and their policy is, they say, well, pro-life, but just for white Catholics folks. Although they can't be too blatant about it, because most of their members now are Black or Asian, and Black. That part of the world is where most of the members are. So they're going to be very discreet about talking about that. But it's been their long policy to do that, and hiding behind the pro-life rhetoric.
86 wants to know, were the scriptures interpreted by man as well?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, we all interpret, right? We all see things through our own lens. So yeah, I don't think they're absolute truth, but they've got to be seen in the context of the deeper message, right? Which is a universal message, I think. Respect each other.
Let me preface this question, Kevin, with YouTube prohibits us wishing physical harm on people. So I will give you the question, and that is, how the hell can we get rid of these deviant, corrupt people who rule our lives?
Just ignore them, pull away from them. Don't inflate their balloon by protesting them or lobbying them or even attacking them. There's no point. Just withdraw and create your own balloon. They deflate as that's been our big focus now in setting up our own assemblies and common law courts and grassroots spiritual communities based on the land. That's how we get rid of their system. Anyway, the individuals are just a symptom of something sicker. There's no point attacking individuals. And that's been the focus of our common law court going back 20 years, that we put the institution on trial, not just individuals who are responsible for particular crimes. Also, don't forget they're destroying themselves. And, just keep the long view, in other words.
So Jake wants to know, is Kevin as sure as I am that the rituals is directly related to demonic possession by principalities, principles, due to the world-consuming suffering? Yeah,
I think so. I mean, I've had direct experience of that. What they call archaic exousiae in the New Testament, or the powers, principalities and powers means the unseen authorities, the things that, like physicists say, you can't see about 80% of the universe, right? These unseen influences, the subconscious in the human mind, right? It's like maximum or minimum, it's all the same phenomena that we can't detect a lot, but there is an essential truth within us that we all have access to. And getting people to trust that and trust themselves and the ability to act on that, that's the real difficulty, because we've all been raised for thousands of years in a state of dependency on others.
Ziva has said, Kevin, do you think we'll get any of the many secrets stashed under the Vatican anytime soon?
Only if we go in and get them. We do have sources that have provided, like the Ninth Circle was provided by a former Vatican librarian who showed us very arcane documents 300 years old referring to it. And there'd be another, the crimen solicitanis policy, where Catholics are expected to protect child rapists. That was released to the London Observer in 2007 by a Vatican source, Vatican library source. So stuff is leaked out all the time. We just don't like to talk about it too much because it might lead you to the person leaking it.
A question for Kevin. Sorry if this is too personal a query, but have his experiences had an impact on his religious or political beliefs?
Oh, I don't mind. I talk about that all the time. I never had religious beliefs, because religion has nothing to do with one's spirituality. It's from a Latin word to tie together, religio, bind people together in one organization. And that's like a corporate idea. But spiritu, breath, right, within all of us. And my spirituality is strengthened. It had to in order to survive this. I would say politically, I've become a lot more radical in that I realize that we have to continually recreate our conditions because it's like anything, yesterday's revolution is today's conservative regime, right? We have to move like nature. Sun Tzu in The Art of War says that there are only two constants in the universe, is conflict and change. And we have to change with that, not our substance, our principles, but the way we live them out every day. It has to evolve and change like nature does all the time. So I become, there's not enough time to go into all that, but I do talk about that in a lot of my books, which, like I said, you can see on Amazon.com.
Tracy wants to know, Kevin, how on earth can those in the royal family go to sleep at night knowing what their bloodline has got up to in the past and just turn a blind eye?
Well, they're not doing anything we all don't do. I mean, we all shut out nasty things. We know that we could be, when I say to people, come on, we're going to go occupy this church, they say, no, I don't know, I might get arrested. Well, then how can they live with themselves that night knowing they haven't done anything, and as a result, children are going to die? So we all accommodate. That's the tyranny of normal. in that it allows us to live alongside evil. So I think we all do it. It's easy to point fingers. If you were in the Buckingham Palace, how would you be living? If you were put in that situation, would you act any different? I mean, so, you know, I think we need to start with ourselves and say, what are we doing? How can we live a more virtuous and real life where we take action, we don't just talk, right?
It starts with ourselves, yes. Do you have any views on Vigano? How do you pronounce that? Vigano.
Oh, he's the Archbishop, right?
Yeah.
It's like saying, are there good and bad Nazis? I mean, yeah, you know, we're there. Yeah, sure. That's why I don't like Schindler's List, that movie at all, because so the good Nazis saved all these poor people. You know, no. So I don't have a view, and because who knows who he is? He's arguing a reform agenda, which I don't think is possible in an institution as deeply, fundamentally corrupt and anti-Christ as the Vatican. I think if people are genuine, they'll get out.
Does the Vatican have a telescope named Lucifer?
I hear so. I hear that they do that. They do have a Vatican Observatory in, is it Arizona or New Mexico? Somewhere in the Southwest. And what's interesting is it's connected to a lot of disappearances. That part of the state where the observatory is located, there's more children go missing than anywhere in America. And I know from social workers who go on down and try to investigate and get stopped and arrested for doing so, that the Anasazi, or what we call the Apache people, in their traditions say that a window opened in the sky many centuries ago and dragons came through the opening, which is interesting. And then these disappearances all connected to that. So, you know, surmise what you will out of that, but it's, yeah, I think it needs more investigating for sure, that area.
Mark wants to know what you think of Mother Teresa and whether she is a saint.
I never met her. How would I know? But I do know that she did accept money from the Duvalier dictatorship in Haiti. She was an extremely kind of reactionary attitude, a lot of things. She said that women who have abortion should be killed. I mean, the media like to portray these people as saints. Like, what is a saint anyway? It's somebody who agrees with our point of view and who we have an interest in making superhuman in some way. But that whole idea of saints and that, it's part of the same mindset that I think we need to get around. I know a hell of a lot of people who do the kind of work that she's purported to have done, and they do it every day without any fanfare. There's a lot of virtuous, good people in the world, but you never hear about them. As a matter of fact, my friend Tom House, an Indigenous man, Anishinaabe from Central Canada, said, in our tradition, you never see the leaders because they're too busy serving the people every day. They're the poorest people in the community. They don't worry about themselves. They're just out there helping people. Those are the saints, if you want to use the word saint. And frankly, in the work I was doing like that, that's how I came across these crimes, because you got to get down there in the mud to find this stuff out by not worrying about yourself. And that's why I don't think the problem is fear, it's selfishness. Because when you lead a selfless life, you're not worried about what happens to you. You're worried about what's going to happen to that kid if you don't act. So I think we all need to be like that, right? That's how things change.
Yeah, and we all need reminding of it as well. So, Ray J, can you explain the significance of Vatican II being brought into play?
Second Vatican Council, John the 23rd, in 1962, it brought in what's called ecumenism, which is like all the religions getting together and overcoming their traditional conflicts. In fact, it was a plan to turn the Catholic religion into the global one. If you noticed, all the Protestant churches will never say a bad thing about the Vatican. It used to be standard policy in every Protestant church in the world that Rome is Antichrist. Not one man, but the city of Rome, the power in Rome is against Christ. Now none of them say it, right? So Vatican II also brought in the policy of crimen solicitanus, saying everybody's got to protect child rapists. Before it applied to priests, after Vatican II, every Catholic in the world had to protect child rapists. So people see it as a progressive thing. I was always taught that in seminary. Oh, let's hear it from Vatican II. They don't use Latin in ceremonies anymore. But the point is, it was part of the kind of globalization or internationalization. Bergoglio, the guy who just died, said he believed in one world religion, the Catholic religion, to which everybody belongs. It's like the global corporate belief system for the global corporatocracy, right? That's the trend. Everything is centralized into one global belief system, and the Catholics want it to be theirs. But the point is that it reflects that bigger phenomena of we don't live in democracies or governments anymore. We live in a corporatocracy, and that's where I begin from, right?
Definitely. Does anything change with the Pope passing? Does the status of Pope really hold any significant power anymore?
I don't think it ever did. Like I say, it was a figurehead. But as long as you keep people, the old saying, you got to keep people looking over here so they can pickpocket them more effectively, because everyone's So that's how pickpockets operate. You create distraction, and that's really that's what they are, right?
Let's see. We've done that one. Let's see. We've done that one. How the hell can we've done that one. All right. What is the truth about Pope John Paul I?
Well, there was a good book about it, In God's Name by David Yallop, where he went into detail about how JP number 1 was discovering like a Freemason lodge called P2 that operated within the College of Cardinals. P2, in fact, was a secret society involving generals, big industrialists, who were the power behind the Italian government and within the Vatican. He found that out, and he started an investigation into the Vatican Bank and their ties with organized crime. But I also read an interpretation that he was also operating, he was from Milan, and he used to be very closely tied to the Ambrosia Bank, which was a kind of a financial competitor with the Vatican Bank. So he had his own kind of axe to grind, why he was in there and everything, but definitely poisoned. Everybody who was connected to him was dead within a year after he died. Even the magistrates and police investigating his death got blown up car bombs that they blamed on the Red Brigade. Turned out it was done by the Holy Alliance, it's called, which is the Vatican Spy and Assassination Bureau. You should look them up. And I've written some stuff on them as well. But they're the ones who do the wet jobs on, inconvenient bishops.
They'll be coming for you if you don't watch it, Kevin. So, Karen,
bring it on.
Is the Vatican named after Vatica, a goddess of the underworld?
Apparently, it means sacred serpent in the Etruscan language. Serpent. It's so it goes back again many centuries. The idea, but it's interesting. The indigenous people over here had a figure who they believed was Christ, who came here. Daganaweda, the great peacekeeper. He's the one who made the 5-nation confederacy in the eastern woodlands. And he had a vision where he said a white 2-headed serpent would come from the east to corrupt the people. And he said the serpent people are crazy, and he means by us, the whites, because they have 2 heads. One is vicious and destructive, the other is kindly and loving. And each head doesn't know they exist, but they're all part of the same body. And that's a perfect description of our culture. We did, like the people who destroyed my life and threw me out of my pulpit. We said, we're praying for you, Kevin. I said, is that Pray or Prey? Let us pray. Let us pray. Which one did they mean?
Praying mantis style. You're getting asked about the 55 miles of library and whether you think that documents have been destroyed over time, documents that conflict with what the Vatican traits.
Well, it's interesting because some of the people I've spoken to who work in the Vatican Library describe an area under the Vatican Library, many centuries old, protected by the military, kind of state-of-the-art security. And they say it's very long, and it contains not just documents, it contains like arcane fetuses and human body parts and all sorts of weird stuff from all over the world, including evidence, according to a woman who knew Cardinal Leger, who was kind of an inside leak during the 1960s. He said that the Vatican sponsored an archaeological dig in Cyprus in the 1950s that found definitive proof that Jesus had not died on the cross and had emigrated. And you know, in the Da Vinci Code movie, they go into that about how Mary, his pregnant wife, went to Marseille and founded the Church of Mary Magdalene. Well, they apparently found archaeological proof that he was a man and all this. And the woman who was with Cardinal Legge said, "Well, why didn't you tell the people?" He said, "Well, then they wouldn't need the church. We can't do that. I think all the careers at stake, right? You got to keep the lie going. Keep the lie going, so people don't become self-governed." Yeah.
Do you think the Vatican has any evidence or documentation of aliens or UFOs?
Well, if such a thing exists, of course they do, because they go to where the money is that can afford to investigate these things. And yeah, they have it.
Who is going to run small mass churches in the next decade? Less and less priests these days. Will it just all go online?
Well, people have to do it themselves. They don't need priests. I think especially if you just go back to the scriptures, it talks nothing about bishops or priests or somebody mediating Christ to you through a communion loaf, or a wafer. I mean, just do what comes naturally and from your heart. And that's always what he used to do. So good enough for him.
That wafer came in very handy in Arizona jail. I was rather hungry. So eyes wide open. Thoughts on Fatima's third secret?
I don't know what that means. Sorry.
I don't either. Right. I think here we go. It's a good one. This is always one of my favorites. Can you tell us about Opus Dei, Kevin?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Do you have an hour?
Yes. However long you've got.
It's a secret society within Opus Dei, the work of God. Hardly. They're kind of like the Jesuits started out as a militaristic secret society that deals with enemies of the Pope personally, but also the College of Cardinals. They've always been behind a lot of the corrupt shit going all over the planet. Military governments, usually you'll find Opus Dei people in them. The death squads. I knew Guatemalan priests who had fled the country, who had all been targeted by Opus Dei death squads within Guatemala and El Salvador. They're always behind these brutal military dictatorships. Bergoglio was one, but secret member. That's one of the requirements, because with the military junta in Argentina, who he was friends with, there's an infamous picture of Bergoglio as a young guy walking arm in arm with General Videla, who had killed over 30,000 Argentines, including throwing priests and nuns out of helicopters into the ocean. And there's Bergoglio arm in arm with his buddy, right? So I mean, it's insidious, and it's one of the enemies, if you like.
They helped Klaus Barbie as well through the rat line, didn't they? The picture of Leon.
Right. Yeah, very connected to the rat lines. And they also something you don't hear about, the third most destructive death camp in Europe during World War II wasn't Auschwitz and Treblinka. Number 3 was called the Jasenovac death camp in Croatia, run directly out of the Vatican, run by a Franciscan bishop, Ivan Saric. And they killed, most of the people they killed were Serbs because they were Orthodox Christians. They weren't Catholics. So the Pope put out a death hit on them, killed about 800,000 Serbs in this death camp. And then a lot of those guys came to work for the National Security Agency and the CIA and the medical experiments in America. So naturally, that death camp had to go down the memory hole. But it's the thing to realize that these things are run directly out of the Vatican. They're not just through their client, puppet politicians or generals, but directly. And that was Bergoglio's role, right?
Kevin, it's always great to have you on. You've done all the questions, and it's great to see you looking so robust after the poisoning, and we appreciate you spending time with us. What would you like to say to the viewers in conclusion?
Well, I wanted to plug the fact that we're charging up again our blog radio show. It's called Radio Free Canada. It'll be Sunday, May 4th at noon Eastern time. bbsradio.com/Radio Free Canada. And we're going to be having a lot of this stuff on there and a lot of guests, people doing things on the ground. And also just to say to people, I would say 95% of the work I've ever done is now gone off the internet. And it's a constant struggle to remind people about not just these issues and what we did, but how we won, how we forced, Ratzinger out of office. Of course, it shows you that it works, but you just can't give up and you can't be afraid, because they're more afraid of us than we are of them, put it that way, when it comes right down to it. And we have the power, we have the numbers, so don't ever lose sight of that fact. And thank you, Sean, for having me on again. It's great being here, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, always love listening to you. Always go so fast and fascinating. So you have a great rest of your day, my friend, and we hope to see you soon, and take care.
Thank you. See you later.
Kevin. Cheers.
All right.
Bye-bye. What a phenomenal guest, folks. We're so lucky he came on with such short notice. And thank you for all of your questions. That really did help steer the conversation. And we've got a lot coming this week, like crazy amount on Wednesday in particular.